Welcome back to English Through Wisdom. I hope you learned something valuable from our last lesson. It is wonderful to have you here again today.
I once heard about a man who had exactly one loaf of bread left in the world and no idea when he would eat again. He was 3 days from the nearest city. He hadn't eaten since morning. And as the sun dropped behind the hills, a voice in the dark whispered 4 words that would decide the rest of his life. My child is starving. He had a choice most of us will never have to make. Keep the bread and live through the night, or give it away and hope the world remembers. Years later, people still tell this story on the roads of old Persia because of what happened after he chose. Welcome to English Through Wisdom. Here we learn English through powerful stories, timeless lessons, and wisdom passed down through generations. Today's story takes us to ancient Persia, to a lonely road, a starving child, and a decision that would test one man's character completely. The royal road of Persia stretched for hundreds of miles, connecting cities that most people would never see in a lifetime. Merchants used it. Soldiers used it. And messengers like Armen used it, walking from town to town with letters, small packages, and whatever goods a merchant paid him to carry. Armen was 35 years old, and if you passed him on the road, you would not look twice. He wore the same brown cloak every season, patched at the shoulders where the strap of his satchel had worn the fabric thin. He was not a wealthy man. He had never owned land, never held a title, never once been mentioned in the records of any court. But in the small villages along the royal road, people knew his name for one reason. Arman never refused someone in genuine need. His father had died when Armen was 19. But before he did, he pulled his son close one evening, over a fire that was almost out, and said something Armen never forgot. Bread fills the stomach. Kindness fills destiny. At the time, Armen thought it was just something tired fathers say to sons. It took him another decade to understand that his father had been handing him a compass, not a proverb. On the evening our story begins, Armen had been walking for 4 days straight. His employer, a cloth merchant in the capital, needed a set of documents delivered to a trading partner 2 cities away, and the pay was good enough that Armen had accepted without asking too many questions about the distance. He had packed enough bread for the journey, careful and disciplined, 1 piece each morning and each evening. By the 4th evening, only 1 loaf remained, wrapped in a cloth at the bottom of his satchel, and the next city was still a full day's walk ahead. He reached a crossroads just as the sun began sinking behind the hills, painting the sand the color of dried blood. There was no inn here, no well, nothing but a dead tree, a few flat stones, and the wind picking up as the temperature began its nightly collapse. Arman sat down against the tree, pulled out the loaf, and allowed himself the small comfort of unwrapping it slowly, the way a man does when he knows this pleasure will not repeat itself for a while. That was when he heard it. A whisper, thin and cracked, coming from somewhere behind the rocks to his left. Please, my child is starving. Arman stood immediately, bread still in hand, and followed the voice. Behind a cluster of boulders, half hidden from the road, he found an old woman kneeling beside a small boy, no older than 6, who lay against her lap, too weak to lift his own head. The woman's eyes met Armen's, and there was no performance in them, no desperation designed to earn sympathy. Just exhaustion, the kind that comes after days, not hours. We were traveling to my daughter's village, the woman said, her voice barely holding together. My son died 2 winters ago. This is his boy. We have not eaten in 2 days. I gave him the last of the water this morning. Armen looked down at the loaf in his hands. He did the arithmetic instantly, the way anyone who has ever gone hungry learns to do. 1 loaf. 1 day of walking still ahead. No village between here and the city. No guarantee anyone else would pass this crossroads before he collapsed from hunger himself. He thought about his own stomach, already tight and aching. He thought about the long stretch of empty road waiting for him at sunrise. And then he thought about his father's fire and the words that had outlived the man who said them. He knelt down in front of the child. The boy's eyes opened slightly, just enough to see the bread in Arman's hands, and something in that small, involuntary flicker of hope was enough to end the debate in Arman's mind before it had properly started. He broke the loaf. He did not calculate a portion for himself and give the rest away, the way a cautious man might. He broke it into 3 roughly equal pieces and placed all 3 into the grandmother's hands. "Take all of it," he said. "You need it more than I do tonight." The old woman stared at him, and for a moment she said nothing at all. Then she reached out, took his hand in both of hers, pressed it once and said quietly, "May the road remember your kindness." Arman smiled, told her the direction to the nearest well he knew of, and walked back toward the crossroads to spend the night with an empty satchel and an emptier stomach. He did not expect to ever see her again. He did not expect the road to remember anything at all. Night fell hard and fast, the way it does in the desert, and the temperature dropped so quickly that Armen found himself pulling his cloak tighter within the hour. His stomach had moved past aching into something closer to a dull, constant pressure. His water skin, already low, would not last the walk to the city if he did not ration it carefully. For the first time since he had broken the bread, a small, cold thought crept into his mind. Had he made a foolish decision? A noble one, perhaps, but a foolish one. Kindness did not fill a stomach. His father's words had sounded wiser beside a warm fire than they did out here. Alone, with the wind cutting through worn fabric and no bread left to eat, he walked through the night rather than sleep, mostly because the cold made sleep impossible, and partly because movement was the only thing keeping his mind off the hunger. Around what he guessed was the middle of the night, he heard hooves. Several sets, moving fast, closing in from the direction of a rocky outcrop to his right. Bandits. He counted 4 of them as they came into view under the moonlight, and he understood immediately that there was nowhere to run and nothing left in his satchel worth stealing, which meant they might simply decide his life was worth taking out of frustration. He stood still, because running was pointless, and waited for whatever was coming. What came instead was a second set of hooves, louder, more numerous, moving in formation rather than in a scattered rush. Royal soldiers, 6 of them, riding hard down the road with the unmistakable discipline of men trained for exactly this kind of encounter. The bandits saw them, weighed the odds, and vanished back into the rocks before a single blade was drawn. The commander of the soldiers slowed his horse as he reached Armen, looked down at him for a long moment, and then said something that confused Armen completely. "You are the messenger. Armen of the Northern Road." Arman had never seen this man before in his life. He said as much, and the commander dismounted, studying his face in the moonlight with something between curiosity and relief. "3 months ago," the commander said, "you helped a traveling stranger on the road near Kashan, a man whose horse had gone lame, who had no food and little water. You shared your rations with him for 2 full days before he found his own way again. You never asked his name." Arman remembered the man vaguely. A quiet traveler in plain, dusty clothes who had thanked him briefly and moved on. Arman had not thought about him since. "That man," the commander continued, "was one of the Shah's own inspectors, traveling in disguise to observe how ordinary people treat strangers when they believe no one of importance is watching. He reported what you did. The Shah gave an order shortly after. If the man named Armen is ever found in hardship on these roads, he is to be protected as the Shah himself would be protected." Armen said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing sensible to say. The soldiers gave him food, more than he could finish in one sitting, and water enough to refill his skin twice over. They escorted him the rest of the way, not to the city he had originally been traveling toward, but to the capital itself, where the Shah had apparently requested to meet him in person once word reached the court. The throne room was larger than anything Armen had ever stood inside, and he felt every patch on his cloak as he walked toward the Shah, who studied him with the calm, unhurried attention of a man who had learned long ago not to judge people by their clothing. "I am told," the Shah said, "that twice now you have given away what little you had, expecting nothing in return. Tell me why. Most men in your position would have kept what was theirs. Hunger makes that easy to justify." Arman thought of the boy's eyes, the flicker of hope when the bread appeared, and the ache in his own stomach that had felt in that moment like the smaller problem. "Hunger passes," Armen said. "Regret lasts longer. I would rather walk one more hungry day than carry the memory of a child I could have fed and did not." The throne room stayed quiet long enough that Armen began to wonder if he had said something wrong. Then the Shah smiled, the kind of smile that comes from genuine surprise rather than politeness, and rose from his seat. He did not offer Armen gold, though gold was certainly available. Instead, he offered him a position that did not yet exist: keeper of a nude traveler's shelter to be built along the royal road, where any hungry or exhausted traveler, regardless of wealth or status, could eat, rest, and continue their journey without fear. Arman, who understood better than anyone what it meant to face that road with an empty satchel, accepted before the Shah had finished the sentence. Years later, travelers still spoke of the shelter keeper who never turned anyone away, who seemed to know exactly what a hungry stranger needed before they had to ask for it. Few of them ever learned the full story of the loaf of bread that started it all. They only knew that something about this particular stretch of road felt different, safer, kinder, as though it remembered. The proverb behind this story does not come from one single documented text, but from a pattern of teachings found across Persian oral tradition and Sufi storytelling, where generosity towards strangers is treated as an investment in something larger than the self. One version, often repeated in Farsi teaching circles, is rendered as harche koni be khod koni, which translates roughly to whatever you do to yourself. The pronunciation is close to harche koni be khod koni. It is not a promise that kindness guarantees a reward. It is closer to an observation about how character shapes the life a person eventually walks into. In many Persian and broader Middle Eastern storytelling traditions, hospitality towards strangers was treated as close to sacred, not because of superstition, but because travel across the desert was genuinely dangerous, and a community's survival often depended on people helping each other without expecting immediate repayment. A traveler fed today might be the one who saves your life on a road 10 years from now. The story we just heard is a dramatized version of that cultural value, not a historical record of a real Shah or a real inspector. This is why the story does not end with magic, or luck, or coincidence dressed up as fate. It ends with a system. The inspector was real in the sense that such systems of quiet observation existed in various royal courts throughout history, where rulers genuinely did try to learn how officials and citizens behaved when they believed no one important was watching. Arman's reward was not a gift from the universe. It was the direct, traceable result of a choice he made when he believed absolutely no one was keeping score. That is the part of the wisdom that tends to get lost when people repeat it as a simple slogan. The saying is not really about bread coming back as bread. It is about the kind of person you quietly become when you consistently choose compassion, even when it costs you something real, and how that person eventually attracts a different kind of life than the one who keeps everything for themselves out of fear. Most of us will never stand at a crossroads with our last piece of bread in our hands. But almost all of us have faced a smaller version of Armen's choice. The 5 extra minutes we could give a coworker who is struggling when we are already exhausted ourselves. The seat we could offer someone on a crowded train. The moment we decide whether to help a stranger move a heavy box, knowing it will make us late. Have you ever hesitated before helping someone, doing the quiet math in your head about what it might cost you? That hesitation is not a character flaw. It is human. Armen hesitated too, if only for a few seconds. What matters is what happens after the hesitation. Have you ever given something away, time, money, attention, and immediately worried you had made a mistake? That cold, uncertain feeling in the middle of Arman's dark, hungry night is probably familiar to you, even if your version of it happened in an office or a hospital waiting room instead of a desert. Kindness rarely feels safe in the moment you offer it. It only starts to make sense afterward, sometimes much later, sometimes in ways you never see directly. And here's the question worth sitting with. If nobody was ever going to find out, if there was no Shah, no inspector, no soldiers riding out to rescue you, would you still have broken the bread? Write your honest answer in the comments. Not the answer you think sounds good. The real one. Weary, meaning extremely tired, especially after a long effort. Example. After the 12-hour flight, she felt too weary to unpack her bags. Satchel, meaning a bag, often worn over the shoulder, used to carry small items. Example, he kept his notebooks and pens in an old leather satchel. Crossroads, meaning a point where roads meet, or a moment where an important decision must be made. Example, after losing his job, he found himself at a crossroads in his career. Genuine, meaning real, true, and not pretended. Example, her apology sounded genuine, so I decided to forgive her. Ration, meaning to limit the amount of something used, usually to make it last longer. Example, during the trip we had to ration our water carefully. Disciplined, meaning showing controlled behavior, following a plan even when it is difficult. Example, he stayed disciplined with his diet even during the holidays. Collapse, meaning to suddenly fall down or fail completely from exhaustion or pressure. Example, she nearly collapsed from exhaustion after the marathon. Hardship, meaning a difficult or painful situation, often caused by a lack of money or resources. Example, the family faced serious hardship after the factory closed. Escort, meaning to go with someone, often to protect or guide them. Example, security agents escorted the singer to her car after the concert. Reward, meaning something given in return for a good action or effort. Example, getting the promotion felt like a reward for years of hard work. Regret, meaning a feeling of sadness about something you did or failed to do. Example, he still feels regret for not calling his grandmother more often. Compassion, meaning a strong feeling of sympathy for someone who is suffering, combined with a desire to help. Example, the nurse treated every patient with patience and compassion. Repeat this paragraph aloud, slowly at first, then at natural speed. Focus on rhythm and stress, not just pronunciation. He knelt down in front of the child. The boy's eyes opened slightly, just enough to see the bread in Armen's hands. He thought about his own stomach, already tight and aching. And then he thought about his father's fire, and the words that had outlived the man who said them. He broke the loaf. He did not calculate a portion for himself. He broke it into 3 pieces and placed all 3 into the grandmother's hands. Take all of it, he said. You need it more than I do tonight. Arman never expected the desert to remember him. He gave away his last piece of bread believing he would simply walk hungry until morning. Instead, that one choice built the life he ended up living. A life spent making sure no other traveler would ever have to face that same crossroads alone. Today we practiced words like weary, ration, and compassion. But the real lesson travels further than vocabulary. What you give away in a moment when no one is watching often becomes the exact thing that finds its way back to you. Sometimes in a form you never could have predicted. Keep learning English, keep discovering stories, and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.
If you enjoyed learning English through this ancient saying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this wisdom today. Until next time, keep learning English and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.